Welcome to the Maximize Business Value podcast brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners like you to maximize your business value and achieve the exit of your dreams, whatever that means to you. With insights gained from over 100 business transactions, we share real-world strategies, lessons, and expert advice to help you build long-term, sustainable value in your business. Each episode is hosted by one of our Mastery certified partners. They're seasoned experts who've helped countless business owners navigate the complexities of growth, scaling, and building value. They bring first-hand experience, actionable insights, and a passion for helping you build a business that thrives. So let's dive in.
Hi, this is Amy Morrin, and welcome to the Maximize Business Value, a podcast for business leaders who are passionate about building long-term sustainable value in their businesses. Today, I am very excited to be joined by Amy Wirtz. Amy is part of the Family Business Consulting Group. Amy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be selected to be a guest on this podcast, and I love talking to you, Amy. We can talk for hours. So.
We can, yeah. Sometimes it's over a little bit of wine.
Yes, it is.
All right. So I want to start by unpacking a little bit about the problems that people don't tend to see. So our focus today is going to be primarily the family business unit, but not solely. But we as exit planners, we tend to focus on the financials and the legal structure and a tax strategy of companies and getting that ready for a succession plan. You happen to spend a lot of time focusing on the family dynamics and the people system, and we're so grateful that you do. But tell our audience as to why this matters and what happens when families tend to skip this part of the planning process.
Well, I think like any decision-making process, we have different things that impact how we go about selecting the final option, right? Like a car or buying a house. But what gets more complex about businesses is that 80% of our family's wealth is tied up in an operating business normally. That's a statistic we quote all the time, right? But on top of that, family businesses have their wealth at risk and their family relationships at risk. And when we don't have conversations about the decisions we're making for transition of the business, whether it's inside transitions or outside transitions, meaning is it a family ownership that's going to go to family again, or is it going to go to management, or is it going to go to a strategic buyer in the field or an ESOP, or are we putting it on the market, right? Or are we bringing private equity in? If we don't talk about that in the family, what happens a lot of times is our family system will kill the deal. And so
unpack that a little bit. Where do you see that and what does that look like?
I'm going to give you one or two examples. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I worked with a family a long time ago. This is probably 10 years ago, that owned a farming equipment dealership, and it was going from 5th to 6th generation, and it was owned by 2 siblings and a cousin. And they only had one person in the next generation that was interested in the business. And they had a rule that you had to own, you had to work there at some point. You had to be. Okay. And so the one cousin's like, yes, I want it. And they had a lot of really good financial planning and tax planning, but they didn't talk about the threats to the industry moving forward or what the plan of the next generation was. It was all focused on the current owners. And what they did is they created a succession plan where the one person was going to do a deferred compensation buyout of the 3 owners, right? And there's a lot of tax planning around that. There's some debt structure around it. There's got to be good cash flow to do that. But deferred compensation plans, for it to be tax effective, need to last about 15 years on the average. Okay. Well, if they had talked to the next generation, they would know that his opinion of the market was he needed to sell in 3 to 5 years because the industry was going from small mom and pop shops to regional ownership, like 3
Mhm.
counties, right? So a friend of mine that was their insurance agent had trained in SEPA and called me and said, Amy, I think we have a problem here. Can you come talk to them? And I said, sure. So I came to talk to them, and I talked to the next gen, and I went back to the owners, and I'm like, can we get your advisors on the phone? Because I'm a little confused. And they said, sure. And I said to the advisors, did you know that the person buying this is looking to sell 3 to 5 years from now? Well, no. What does that do to your plan? And it blows it up. And they were about to ink this deal. They were like 2 weeks away from inking this deal, but
Wow.
nobody talked to the next generation. And so the whole plan had to be redone. And they'd spent 7 months on this plan, but they never talked to the next generation.
Hmm.
So they didn't involve all the family. They only involved the current owners. They treated it like a non-family sale,
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
right? Because that's what they did. And that would just not have worked for that family. So in 2 half-day workshops, we redid the deal by having
Okay.
all of the family there that needed to make decisions and their advisors in one room, creating a plan that worked for everybody and really
Mm.
balanced out the tax advantages and the issues, and set a price that was doable. So that's one thing. Another thing I can tell you is I had a situation where a family was going to sell, and one of the community members, this was the 6th generation going to 7th generation construction company, and they were very involved in the nonprofit organizations in town. And one of the community members said, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. You're going to sell this business? Why? You've been such a great family company. Well, their why was these 2 brothers owned with a cousin, and one of the cousin's children came into the business, and it was a disaster. So instead of
Mm.
dealing with how do we make it successful, how do we put policies and education practices in to make it successful, they just decided no kids can come in and we're going to sell it. Well, that cousin died, and their perceived risk of his children coming into the business now is gone, because they had a shareholder agreement where if somebody dies, you buy them. It was like mandatory. We call
Yeah.
it a shotgun agreement. So last man standing owns company is what that means.
Okay.
And so now it was the 2 brothers, and they looked up and they're like, why are we selling it? Well, at this point, these 2 brothers are 77 and 72 years old. So their kids are like in their 50s and 40s.
Yeah.
None of them have worked in the business. And they decided, well, we're going to do a family transition, and we're going to bring 2 family members. Like, each of us are going to pick a kid to bring to the company. And that's what they did. And they didn't have a meeting. They didn't talk about it. They didn't talk about leadership. They didn't talk about it with the family. Well, when 2 of the 6 were chosen and not the others, that caused family problems.
Yeah.
The leaders that thought it might go to a management buy, which is what they promised them, were PO'd.
Yeah. I bet.
Really PO'd. So do you see how I'm saying, like, not talking to the family, not having these conversations creates problems?
Yeah, for sure.
Did I answer
So
your
it's not, yeah, yeah. So it's not just financially, it's relationally as well, right? And then you have to sit around the Thanksgiving table. So at
Mhm,
some point in the year, right?
mhm.
So yeah, it
Yeah.
yeah, we need to get people to start talking about it. Um, you help families assess readiness for succession or exit. What does not ready look like from a people and family standpoint, not just operationally or financially, but in this situation, it sounds like the latter situation that you talked about. We've got 2 adult males who came into the business that sounds like hadn't even worked in the business prior, right?
Well, they were females. That was what was really
Okay.
interesting, because
Oh, that's great. I love
they brought
females in
in,
construction.
they didn't have any sons. So all they had was
Okay.
daughters. So it was
Yeah.
son-in-laws or daughters. That was awkward because they really didn't have a lot of respect for women, the two owners in construction.
Oh,
I didn't know what to do with them.
yeah.
The leadership team didn't really know what to do with them either. But let's talk about what it ready doesn't look like.
Yeah.
Ready
Yeah.
doesn't look like when there is not alignment within the vision of transfer for the owning generation and the next generation. So
Okay.
if I have 3 siblings and 8 cousins, and the 3 siblings all worked there their whole lives, like from
Hmm.
7 until they're in their 70s. They were at that facility picking up trash cans, emptying trash cans, handing out
Yeah.
menus, whatever it was, right? And their vision of ownership is that same dedication to being at the restaurant and hotel 7 days a week. A family member's
Yeah.
always got to be there, right? Even though now it's not one restaurant, it's a restaurant, a golf course, an indoor water park, and a boutique hotel. It's more, right?
Yeah.
They have
Yeah.
a lot more professional management and a lot more employees, right?
Hmm.
Their vision of ownership doesn't meet the needs of the business or the next generation's vision of ownership,
Hmm.
right? And so what does deciding you have to work there mean for the next generation of cousins? If they don't want to work there, can they own? If they can own, in what way can they own?
Hmm.
How do you set compensation in a way that meets everyone's view of fair pay, like a qualified
Yeah.
fair pay for those that work there and those that don't? Will you give dividends for the first time in the history of the 5 generations of ownership? Is there a new way to have financial benefit from ownership? How do you balance the exiting leaders' desire for money from the entering leaders? And how do you balance salary with the rights of ownership? All of
Yeah.
those things. Does that make sense to you? Like, that's misalignment. They haven't had any of those conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
What happens a
You know,
lot?
and I've sold 2 businesses, right? The first was construction. I was a female in construction industry. And when we were getting ready to sell that company, we have 2 sons and asked our sons, when they were in high school, they worked in the company, but neither one of them desired ownership,
Mhm.
to be an owner, to run that company. But we never had a conversation beyond that, Amy. And it sounds like there would have been some other options that we could have explored that nobody, again, one of the reasons that I became a certified exit planning advisor is because I say that I messed up my 2 exits. Like I just didn't have the knowledge. I didn't have the team behind me to have these conversations to get ready for an exit and realize really what does a successful exit look like. And so as
We
I'm
call that
passionate
the
about that.
school of hard knocks.
Oh yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah,
Right?
I did happen to get an MBA, which was way easier than the School of Hard
Hard
Knocks. But
knocks. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So let's talk about a non-financial risk. So we have, have you seen an example of a family business where the financials look great, the operations are strong, they're running on EOS, they've got a really good operating system and an accountability way of tracking accountability and metrics. Um, Yet the people dynamics made the business untransferable or unsaleable. What does that look like, or what would maybe they have gone wrong in that situation?
Um, this is not a family I worked with, but I know of. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
So, a fourth generation multi business owning family owned several businesses, right? And they refused to pick one leader because the branches wanted to make sure that their voice was at the top. So they put 2 leaders without proper roles, responsibilities, and authority set forth. They did not have an aligned vision of the why of ownership,
Yeah.
right? They did for one company, but not for the biggest cash company.
Okay.
Okay. And so these two leaders came in with they were following the mandates of their branches.
Yeah.
And they were at different stages of life. Like one was 36 and one was 42. One was having children. One's children were in high school. They had different views of what working meant, right?
Yeah.
At that level. And one quit and demanded the other be fired. And so the chairman of the board, who was her father, fired the other president of the company. And all at once, they had no leadership.
Yeah.
And then one side went in and wiped out the board. So at the same time that they had no president, they also had no board because of the machinations of not having an aligned vision in the family ownership.
Yeah.
And demanding that, looking at it from branch system instead of from the family enterprise, that we all work together, we all row together, we all make money together. It became a very destructive, dysfunctional approach to, ownership and family relations inside a very large industrial complex that employed thousands and thousands of people. And that family stuff then puts all of that at risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I just did a talk at the Business Transition Summit, and I'm talking about this because of, what you're describing there, Amy, seems to me like a culture issue too, right?
Yeah.
If we have no aligned vision, I can't even imagine what the culture in all of those branches, organizations were. And so a question from the audience was, I'm talking on the strengthening the 4 human capitals. And so I get to, the human capital and the culture and the structural capital side, and I'm talking culture. And one of the questions from the audience is, if we end up selling to a PE firm, then why does culture matter? Because they're going to come in and destroy it. Right. And that's what I said.
PE firm any good.
Right. That was my response. So great to hear you say that as well.
I would say that someone who has had a really bad experience with a PE firm, and there are bad PE firms, just like there are bad family businesses and bad partnerships and bad, publicly traded companies, and right. Now, my question is the real issue, they might change the culture, and so for that owner, changing what they built is seen as a failure?
Yeah.
Right.
Typically, though, the data supports, I pulled data at the end of 2025 on what PE firms are looking for. And really a strong culture, strong leadership is more important to them right now than in operations, to be honest with you.
So the PE firm doesn't come into daily management. They don't want daily management. They want to do high level ownership vision that, produces a lot of value in a 7 to 2 year window that keeps that company growing and producing. And a bad culture is only going to do the opposite of that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And we work on cultural alignment a lot in EOS. So you describe your role as creating alignment across family and business systems. And what does that process actually look like, Amy?
Thank you for tuning in to the Maximize Business Value podcast. This episode is the first of a 2-part release. Part 2 will be posted next week.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Maximize Business Value podcast. I hope today's conversation sparked new ideas on how you can continue driving value in your business. But remember, it's not just about listening. It's about taking massive action. Visit our website, masterypartners.com, for more resources. Grab a copy of any of the books in the Maximize Business Value series on Amazon or via the links below. And don't hesitate to reach out if you want to know how to apply these concepts to your business. So until next time, I'm Tom Bronson, reminding you to relentlessly execute while you maximize business value.